With what Max Verstappen just said, it's making me think he ain't leaving Red Bull. And that Sergio Perez should probably give up what he's trying to do, supposedly, because it ain't working. Also, I think you might be sleeping on a really good F1 website that I came across. And no, it's not from Britain. It's actually from Jolt Baumgartner country. You see, during the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend, Max Verstappen sat down with Formula.hu, away from the realms of Sky Sports F1, and opened up on a lot of topics which have now started to permeate their way across the internet. Many other news sites have actually started to cover this interview, but I recommend going for the original source. It is in Hungarian, you can translate it, but it does really go in depth with Max Verstappen, and he feels relatively more candid than he is when he conducts interviews with the likes of British journalists. And the reason why it's going through all of these standard websites now is that it actually makes a colossal impact, and it does explain quite a few things that many people had thought about in regards to how Max Verstappen ticks, how he is treating the current situation regarding competition, and also, most importantly, whether or not he will actually leave the team or not, and the destiny of any teammate that dares get in the same car as him. It really does explain a lot of things in my mind, so do allow me to indulge myself as I give you a light sprinkling of maximum yap. Basically, what Max said to the Hungarian news site now makes me reckon that, in at least the short to medium term future, he is not going to be leaving Red Bull, regardless of all of the people that are leaving the organisation, which made it what it is today. That he isn't particularly bothered about his teammates' struggles on a mechanical level either, that the 2026 rules aren't as disgusting as he originally feared, and that his attitude towards setups will not gel well with either Mercedes or Aston Martin. These are the two teams, by the way, that are supposedly trying to snatch him from the jaws of Red Bull, that they are willing to throw hundreds of millions of dollars into the project, trying to secure the services of the multiple world champion, much like how Ferrari secured the services of Lewis Hamilton for nigh on $500 million over a few years. I wish to explore that angle first regarding his loyalty toward Red Bull, and then I'll get onto the idea about what's going on with Checo, and why I think he really needs to change his act if he wants to get anywhere with that team in the not too distant future, and actually serve out that 2026 contract. In regards to the idea of Max leaving Red Bull and going to another team, even though people up and down the internet, myself included, have touted him leaving the team as early as next year to go to Mercedes, and that other operations are prepared to offer anything to secure his services, the only way that I think Max Verstappen will actually stand up and just walk out of Milton Keynes is if we get something that is akin to what happened in 2014 with Sebastian Vettel. Any less than that, and Max will stay out the course. Because you might be thinking, oh, it's the downfall of Red Bull and Max will not tolerate any of it and he will absolutely loathe it and he will abandon the team as quickly as possible. Well, no, it hasn't gotten to that level yet. 2014, that was bad. Back then, Sebastian was riding the highs of his fourth title the previous year, and 2014 was the biggest punch to the gut any world champion could have ever suffered. Almost akin to what Michael Schumacher had to deal with from 2005 after 2004's domination. Not only did the RB10 not hold a wick, let alone a candle to Mercedes that year, but his teammate was running rings around him. It got to the point, if you really look back at the results, that Sebastian bagged no wins at all that entire season. And Daniel, he secured 3 of them. 3! That is absolutely crazy. That come down is bonkers. Sebastian could barely get on the podium. More often than not, if he did get on the podium, he was third, except for a second place at the Singapore Grand Prix, but that was only gifted to him because Nico Rosberg had to retire due to the steering wheel bugging out on him. He was prepared to go to Ferrari, which had a car that year that sucked just as badly as the vacuum cleaner it was trying to resemble. You can almost think it was the biggest insult Seb could throw at that team. It was basically them going, this is what I think of you, I'm going to the team, which is actually arguably doing even worse. It would have to be absolutely cataclysmically dire for Max Verstappen to leave, but right now, it's just not there. Sure, Max is going through a little bit of a winless streak right now, but he has been able to win in that car. If we get to a position where Max Verstappen hasn't won any races at all, or he maybe have won one through just pure luck, then you might be starting to think that maybe the end is nigh for his time in Milton Keynes. But wait, Law, what about all the internal fighting and all the personnel leaving Red Bull? Their domination arc is over, surely. Okay, yeah, I hear you. Those are perfectly valid things in which to bring up. But at the same time, these effects do not take immediate hold. They take at least a year or two to really manifest itself. If there are junior personnel that can do just as good a job, if not better, then it might be all absolute smoke and mirrors. It might be absolutely fine. We don't know. You might be thinking that Max won't tolerate uncertainty, but right now, things are working just fine. And he feels that Red Bull can actually deliver him the goods, even though he has said quite clearly the ball is in their court. It's Red Bull's turn to step up to the plate in his mind, according to that exclusive interview. The RB20 is not terrible, nor will it become terrible, but the bods over there do admit that they are disappointed with its potential, and that they still haven't found the spark that can get them multiple tenths on the competition with a single upgrade. Just small little gains, which has been the watchword this year, which maybe is enough to keep them where they are in terms of the pecking order, and just about enough to remain in contention for a victory. And this is before McLaren introduce their next big upgrade package, because remember, they've only introduced one major package back in Miami and then a front wing in Austria. You can understand why some people at Red Bull are probably getting the collywobbles just thinking about that, right? And to be fair, I think Max did this interview before what went down during the Hungarian Grand Prix itself, when we saw him explode in dramatic fashion. But I can't imagine that his opinion would have changed overnight, as he himself says he doesn't make big decisions using emotion as his guide. Even though sometimes it may look like that's the way he conducts himself on track sometimes. I know that a lot of people want to paint Max Verstappen as a really cruel and vicious person that absolutely hates everybody and has zero respect for all concerned. No, he's not like that. On track, he is a vicious person. Like Michael Schumacher and Ayrton Senna, they are relentless when it comes to them wanting to win. But off the track, they're as good as gold. They're kittens. They're nice people. They're respectful people. The point is, though, is that Max is not going to leave off of the back of one tricky season, the first that he's had since 2021. And in fact, he does find the situation kind of exciting in a way. Him saying that nobody saw what 2024 would bring coming. Yes, he does also admit that he wished that he could have a little bit more time when he was winning by 20 or 30 seconds. I think any driver would want to have that continue. But obviously, it wasn't going to happen. He was, and Red Bull were, realistic that these times will come to an end. You can't have 2023 all of the time. But what I do like to hear from Max is that he is open to a little bit of competition. And when it comes to the idea of this year being more competitive than ever in recent years, when you have 7 different winners in the first half of 2024, Max doesn't only find that appealing, he actually considers it beautiful. But what isn't so beautiful is that his teammate is the only front-running driver that hasn't won a Grand Prix. At the moment, Max is enjoying the closer competition because he is in the mix. Just remember that. He is leading the pack at the moment. He'll probably win this year's title anyway, thanks to the RB20 starting off the year as the clear favourite, like Jenson Button did in 2009, and we don't belittle his championship ever, now do we? We shouldn't do the same to Max. If the wheels start to fall off next year and Red Bull don't find it quite so easy, and the RB21 proves to be even more tricky to implement in terms of setup than the RB20 was, then you might be justified to think that Red Bull is finding a tricky situation in which to keep their star driver. But the only way he'll pack up his toys and go somewhere else for sure is if Red Bull collapses spectacularly, to the point where he cannot even figure in the hunt for victory on the regular, whilst his teammate is struggling, or worse, for Max, winning. We've got to see what happens with the Red Bull powertrains division. Many people are thinking and saying that it's actually a pretty good division and their power unit may be quite competitive, but we don't know that yet. Nobody expected Renault to fall off as hard as it did in 2014 compared to 2013. There were troubles in the V8 era, sure, but they were not nearly as bad as the V6 era. That was awful. And also in regards to Max's future teammate or potential teammate actually doing better than him, it's making me think that Yuki Tsunoda is not destined to become his teammate, because he's been incredibly punchy in his interviews, saying that he is ready to take Max Verstappen on, and that kind of rhetoric is not going to go down well in Milton Keynes. Come back to me in 2026 should Red Bull get the regulations wrong, and then we might see Max move. But let's just park that for now, because another part of his confession does go against what Red Bull are trying to say regarding Checo, and that is to do with the long-held belief about setups. And yes, it also ties in with my first point, that Aston Martin and Mercedes are just not compatible in terms of what Max Verstappen wants. Because seriously, do you really think Papa Stroll will tolerate Max's desire for the team to correlate itself around him and not Lance Stroll, his boy? Because that's been the modus operandi of that team ever since Lawrence Stroll bought the team. Max and Aston Martin. Oh, no, that is just a complete and utter mismatch. That's just going to go down in flames, and it just won't happen. Max won't tolerate that BS. The only thing that's giving me misgivings about Red Bull's future is that the rhetoric from that team is that they want both drivers to flourish with the current car equally, but the watchword has and will be always that Max is the top banana, and the car is built to work with Max's driving style. That part is common knowledge at this point. But when you get Verstappen himself admitting it, when Formula.hu asked for his response to Alex Albon's comments with the High Performance podcast in relation to what it's like to be teammates with him, the Dutchman simply reaffirms that belief. He wants the car to work with him as best as possible, optimized for his ability. And for anyone else, he's just like, that's just how it is, as he says right here. For my part, I simply like it when the front of the car turns well. I like it to turn in quickly and very definitely. But of course, everything has to be in balance. We can't just put everything on the front axle and expect the rear of the car to follow suit. You'll have to try and find the middle ground. But of course, it is possible that my middle ground is different from others. Everyone has their own driving style, so what works for me might not work for someone else. But other drivers drive differently, and they are also very fast. So for me, the way my car behaves is completely natural, because I like this kind of car. But maybe it is not favourable for others. That's how it works. So yes, of course, he admits that other driving styles are quick, but this is his car. He declares the RB20 as his. What is curious though, and take this next part with a pinch of salt, but it kind of goes hand in hand with that quote, is that Max was overheard apparently talking to Daniel Ricciardo, this coming from Sportskeeda and Formula Passion, that Red Bull had overdone it in regards to Max's setup preferences, that the rear had become untamable in his words in the pursuit of pointiness, and that prevented Max from getting the most out of the car, and that it ultimately become everything that he had loathed in a particular vehicle. Slow and cumbersome in the corners. Granted, this is an overheard conversation, it cannot be verified, but if this is true, and just hearing it, trying to get into Max's head and what makes him tick, this is fascinating, that he opened up to Daniel of all people. However, I have to think rationally here, and I cannot run on that comment alone. But it sort of does explain what's been going on with Sergio Perez in a way, and what Helmut Marko said earlier in the year regarding what Checo's trying to do. In short, what he tried to do last year, and for some of the year before that. And that is basically just writing down the cliff notes from Max Verstappen's setup and thinking if that will work with this driving style, when it fundamentally won't, because they are quite different. Marko did announce earlier in the year that Sergio was following Max's setup, which Dr. Marko reckoned was the fastest setup regardless, that, hey, Max is quick in it, so everyone will be quick in it. And that was the reason Checo was able to get all the podium finishes that he got earlier in the year, all of them done with earlier versions of the RB20 before the Imola upgrade package came into play. Now you might be thinking, well okay, that's cool, what Red Bull are trying to do by giving him a pre-Imola spec car, that's great, they're really looking out for him. But in a way, it's Helmut Marko being Helmut Marko again, by saying, oh, he's only good with Max's setup, he's copying! But I've got news for you, Helmut, that happens all the time. Teammates look to their other teammates' setup for guidance, that's just what it is. But in a way, yeah, Sergio is compromising his own ability by just completely going against the fundamentals, what made him the tyre whisperer back in the day. You see, Checo's style is geared more towards front understeer, which Max absolutely detests, and that, for Checo, can yield rear-end stability where he can get the grip, and that's where he got the reputation of being kind to his rear tyres, and making sure they don't overheat, especially with Pirelli tyres, which are extra sensitive. And he can modulate them accordingly, which is why at street circuits, according to the race, he is better than he is at conventional circuits. This is all well and good, but Checo is just not following his ideal way of doing things with a car, something that he believed could work back a couple of years ago, and it didn't work, where it's become obvious that even though it gives you a fast car, it's really only going to work for Max since he is the one bagging the regular wins and championships. Unfortunately for Checo and Red Bull, Sergio's experimenting over the last couple of years didn't really matter all so much because from the second half of 2022 all the way to the opening races of this year, Red Bull had a distinct advantage where there was a little bit of breathing space where, hey, if Sergio wasn't entirely optimal, he was probably going to end up in the podium or top 5 anyway, so the Constructors' Championship, it's all good. Oh, Max can get the Drivers' title, that's absolutely fine. Checo, hey, yeah, you might be struggling, but don't worry about it. There's no pressure on you for the team title, mate. Just do what you need to do to get yourself up to speed, yeah? But the thing is, though, it's become quite clear. Red Bull does not have that luxury anymore. Checo doesn't have that luxury anymore. Either he has to figure out Max's setup quickly and really drive it as well as Max can, or he just has to go back to what he knows best and get the most of it as he can. And even though Christian is quick to deny that Red Bull builds a car for one driver, that they're just trying to build the fastest possible car, the other things that he has done to preserve Checo's seat currently, which went against what they had previously said before Spa, that this was his last chance before a mid-season swap could come into play with that meeting, and those performance-related exit clauses, it just negates the feeling and it just completely turns into mush. And that in turn makes me think that Max is just not going to be compatible with Mercedes or Aston Martin, no matter how big his paycheck will be. With things as tight as they are in terms of the championships, teams need to make the most of both of their drivers. And if the solution for Checo to give him an earlier spec car doesn't work, Red Bull might have to really consider that the team title for 2024 is all but lost. And even though Mercedes is being touted to be getting the services of Max Verstappen relatively soon, I just don't think it will work well based on the direction where they want to take their driver lineup at. Right now, the W15 is looking to optimize itself to cater to both drivers. Yes, you could argue that George Russell is being favoured over Lewis Hamilton, although it is perfectly reasonable for them to do so because George is staying with them for next year and Lewis isn't. Both drivers have been able to get something out of that car, with Lewis bagging 2 wins, George bagging a win. He could have had 2 wins, but then disqualification happened. Either way, Mercedes are doing really well because they've optimized the car that both drivers can get something good out of it, and they can get many points, and they can get back towards 3rd place in the Constructors. The same was the case during the Hamilton-Rosberg and Hamilton-Bottas era as well. Both drivers could make use of their respective machines. And even though Bottas was outclassed a lot of the time by Lewis, he did have his moments in qualifying especially, being one of the only drivers to get into Q3 for over 100 Grand Prix, and it meant that Rosberg and Bottas did not flounder as hard as Perez is right now. Although you could make an argument for Bottas in 2018, where he did have a really bad year, relatively speaking, and he even did consider retiring at that point. But even then, he wasn't the last of the front runners. And even though Toto is obsessed with Max Verstappen, I doubt he wants to put all of his eggs into one basket. In his ideal world, Toto wants to have 2 fast drivers who believe in a team-first mentality. And right now, it's going to be George and Kimi Antonelli for 2025. It's looking clear as day. And I don't really think that Verstappen and Antonelli will work well, because Antonelli will want to prove himself if he does get that call up to the top team. And then Verstappen's here. He's been brought in to lead them back into a new era of domination. There's just conflicting messages about what they want to do. And therefore, it's just going to cause utter disharmony. Max wants things done in a certain way, and he wants the car to work in a certain way. So if he works in with a balanced car, sure, he can maybe tolerate it, but you might not get the best out of him. You might not get a 2023 season at Mercedes if you just get a car which is relatively neutral and relatively versatile. You need a car which is more oversteery at the front. And we don't know anything about Kimi Antonelli's driving style in an F1 car just yet, so we need to wait and see whether or not Kimi is actually versatile in that way. And whatever you give Max in that car, Kimi can do just as well at, which is what I think is working at McLaren. That Lando and Oscar are relatively similar in driving styles, so whatever they throw at Lando, Oscar can work with just as well. And if Mercedes goes against that, and Max isn't the top banana there, then you might not get a happy Dutch camper. Yes, Toto is desperate for Max, but I don't think Max is desperate for Toto, so just wait and see. I don't really see that happening these days, even though in terms of the car and the mechanics, it does look good. But again, I just think that it's a little bit too early to say right now. Come back to me in a couple of years. And as for Aston Martin, oh, come on. That team is going to do everything in its power to make that car dance for Lance. Oh, hey, cool, that rhymed. Neat. The team is grabbing Honda power, which wins titles. They have the backing of Aramco, who will do anything and spend anything to win, and are supposedly leading the charge when it comes to 2026 regulations about sustainable fuels. And if they can secure the likes of Adrian Newey, taking him away from Ferrari, then I bet your bottom dollar, then Lance Stroll will suddenly start winning races and bagging podiums. Maybe not in the first year of Adrian Newey's services, but maybe in the second year. It might take some time, but the direction is looking really positive for Lance Stroll to suddenly and miraculously become good. Because Mike Crack, the team principal, has made it quite clear that the team revolves around Lance Stroll. The team exists because of Lance Stroll. Whoever's in that other seat, who you think is the team leader, is not. They are window dressing. And it just makes me think that this team is using the legacy of Sebastian Vettel, Fernando Alonso, and potentially Max Verstappen to stack them up against Lance Stroll. And hey, he doesn't have to beat them, he just has to hold his own against them. Hey, look at this kid. He collectively has been able to hold his own against drivers who have collectively at least 10 world championships. 9 at the moment, but it probably will be 10 after this year. But hey, doesn't that make Lance Stroll look good? Yeah. Just think about it, yeah. I don't think any other driver could probably say that. They had these many World Championship teammates and, they didn't fall apart and crumble. In the end, Verstappen will be viewed as a trophy driver, and he will not be the team leader in a way that he is accustomed to at Red Bull. Do you seriously believe that Max Verstappen would put up with any of that kind of theatrics? No, because there is a Fernando Alonso to consider, and he also wants to work with Adrian Newey, and he has actually shown that he is more willing to toe the line because, he remains in F1 and he wants to be in F1. He lives and breathes F1. Fernando will do anything at this moment to get in a car which is motivated and designed by Adrian Newey, and he can win the 33rd Grand Prix and maybe go after a title. So I think trying to get Max Verstappen, Fernando will need a very, very big payoff. Let's just say that. And also, again, Max will not put up with any of that. He wants to be the leader. Lance is not a leader. Right now, what we can glean from Max's comments from Formula.HU is that he is happy where he is, that he won't make any major calls based off of emotion, and that he indeed prefers a car and setup which isn't for everyone, and that might be at the expense of his teammate. And even though in some interviews, Max has tried to make some effort in taking the heat off of Checo, saying that, oh, cut him some slack, he's doing what he can, it's fine, I'm not particularly bothered. But that's the point. He's not bothered about his teammate, because Max has said in previous interviews that he doesn't really care who his teammate is so long as they don't get in his way. And I think that Yuki Tsunoda, even though I think he deserves a chance to be in the Red Bull Racing seat, he will get in Max's way. He has said so publicly. And even though Daniel and he did butt heads back in the day, both men have matured, and I think that probably is a way that things will go. Although I think he does entertain the idea of Daniel being his teammate again sometimes, now they've grown up a little. Which is why the fate of Ricciardo right now really baffles me, and what Red Bull are doing with him just confuses me. Something that I discuss more of in this video here that you can go and watch right now, and I just really hope Christian knows what he's doing, because I just don't think he knows what he's doing.